Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a highly respected and popular Australian actress who became a household name throughout the world because of her unforgettable portrayal of inmate Ali Novak on the critically acclaimed, multiple award-winning smash hit TV show, Wentworth. She also co-starred with her friend Rebel Wilson in three popular comedy series, The Wedge, Bogan Pride, and the American sitcom Super Fun Night. Her versatility as an actress has enabled her to play a wide variety of memorable characters, including Wendy Pierce in Killing Time, Antoinette Montebello in The Straits, Kate Reid in Offspring, Carol in The XPM, Tara in Dr. Doctor, Grace Cresswell in Amazing Grace, and Melanie Best in Five Bedrooms. She punctuates her performances with intelligence, intensity, and astounding realism. I'm delighted to welcome the wonderful Kate Jenkinson to our show. Kate, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say, that's maybe the best introduction I've ever had. So can you be my hype person henceforth?
Anytime at all. I'm a huge fan.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was quite the introduction. I'm chuffed. Thank you.
Kate, you've been a very well-known actress in Australia since at least 2006 when you started working on The Wedge. But in recent years, primarily because of Wentworth, you've attained international recognition. It must feel great to finally see the whole world taking an interest in you and your work.
You know, it's so funny because often I think actors forget about the sort of the very obvious fact that people watch our work. Because it's really quite rare that a show can reach the heights of, say, something like Wentworth. Very often, and certainly I suppose my career is indicative of this, is that you can be working since 2004, 20 years essentially, and most of the projects that you work on really only receive a small audience, and it's only very, very rarely, and sometimes never, that you find yourself on a show that has international recognition. So yeah, it is, to answer your question, it's lovely to be a part of something that is recognized as a great project, not only locally but globally. And I got so lucky to be a part of Wentworth because it was already a juggernaut when I joined. And yeah, it's lovely to know that the work that you do and the thing that you put so much of your efforts and passion into is recognized. Yeah, so it is nice, but I often don't think about it, and I forget that what I do is so public. And when you do have those moments where maybe someone recognizes you on the street, or you conduct an interview like this, you sort of have to remind yourself that, oh yeah, people see what I do for work. Most people check into their office and no one knows what they do, but it's, yeah, what I do for work is publicized.
Who were your role models and the actors and actresses that inspired you as you were learning your craft as a young actor?
Wow, that's a really good question. It's something I haven't thought of in a really long time. I definitely Robert De Niro. When I was younger, I became obsessed with him and his movies. And I suppose as a young closeted actor, someone who hadn't quite come out as a wannabe actor yet, I think as a sort of 15, 16-year-old, I was obsessed with Robert De Niro, and his films are often quite dark and not the average fodder for a 15-year-old girl to be watching, but I became very obsessed with his work. Daniel Day-Lewis is still, I think, one of the most interesting and intriguing actors of our time. Heath Ledger, more a locally homegrown actor. Heath Ledger, I just think it was always incredibly interesting, and such a shame to lose such a talent in the prime of his excellence, I thought. And I really liked all of the dames as well. I liked Dame Judi Dench, Maggie Smith, all of those kind of theatrically minded English actresses that's kind of had a wonderful career on stage and then transitioned to film. I always had a soft spot for those. So many actors that I kind of have admired and been inspired by. You mentioned Rebel when you were introducing me, and she's someone who's a constant inspiration to me, not only because of her skill and versatility, but also her business sense. This is a business at the end of the day, the entertainment business, and she's really a master at taking a creative pursuit and turning it very much into a successful business. So I've been very inspired to see her do that.
It's well known that Australia produces some of the best television shows in the world in terms of the writing, the acting, and the production values. What is it that makes the Australian film industry so extraordinarily high quality?
Oh, thank you for saying that. Certainly we have plenty of misses here in Australia as well, but I think you're right. You are onto something, and I think it's because my guess would be that in Australia, we just do not have the kind of budgets that, say, somewhere like America or maybe even the UK would have to produce film and television. So there's not as much, I suppose, risk taken in Australia. I think for something to get off the ground and for money to be put into a project here in Australia, I think it has to be so heavily vetted, and it kind of has to be a sure thing before it even gets off the ground, because studios over here and production companies just don't have the money to make losses. Basically, in America, the television production system over there is just extraordinary. Having been a part of it myself, productions can be millions of dollars spent to make something, and if it's just not getting the ratings, it's cut in an instant and no one sort of thinks twice about it. And they have the kind of money and the kind of audiences that can sustain those failures, whereas I think in Australia we don't really have the budgets and the finances to sustain failures. So they really have to kind of find projects that seem like they're going to work.
Well, a good example of what I'm talking about when I refer to the superior quality of Australian television is a show you did called Hiding, in which your character Marie and her family had to go into the witness protection program. The writing on that show was absolutely phenomenal, don't you think?
I do think. My friend Matt Ford wrote that show, and little known fact, there was a really popular band in Australia during the 90s, I think early 2000s, called Machine Gun Fellatio, and it was a really popular band. Their music was extraordinary, and he was the front man for Machine Gun Fellatio, and turns out an extraordinary writer. And he writes for TV predominantly now, and he wrote it was one of the best shows that I have ever read, and it's actually one of my favorite productions. But an interesting example, because I remember when filming it and when it came out, I remember feeling so proud of it and thinking that it was going to be something that would continue, but just didn't find an audience enough to sustain the cost of the show. And so it, like so many shows that had one season and was done.
Your friendship with Rebel Wilson led to 3 collaborations with her, The Wedge, Bogan Pride, and Super Fun Night, which gave you a chance to work in America. Do you have any plans to work with Rebel Wilson again in the future?
My gosh, if she can find any time in her busy schedule to produce another show that there's a spot for me in, I would in a heartbeat. She's not only a great friend, she's an extraordinary force within this industry, and I think just has a real knack for being able to create projects that have a wide appeal. So yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. But she's maybe the busiest and hardest working person I know. So I don't like my chances of being able to get her in one spot for long enough to actually film something with her. But I'll live in hope that might happen again, because it's certainly, for me, it's been a very happy working relationship.
Well, you played Kendall, the super bitchy lawyer with the fabulous shoes in Super Fun Night. Was that one of your favorite roles so far?
It's my favorite role. Actually, yeah, it was a dream come true of mine to be in a sitcom. I grew up, like so many people, watching great American sitcoms like Friends, gosh, what else was it? Seinfeld. So many that I can remember growing up with and loving. And I think I probably developed my sense of comedy and my love for comedy by watching shows like that. So it was always a dream of mine to be in a sitcom in America, and that was my first foray into that world. And it was so much fun, to work on those iconic sets in LA, and to work in that medium was something that was very special. And I hope that I get to do it again.
Oh, I hope so too. In 2012, you got the chance to work with Brian Cox in a miniseries called The Straits, which was about a family involved in drug trafficking. What was it like to work with Brian Cox? He's one of my favorites.
Oh my gosh, he's a legend. And I'm so glad that, I actually think that the character he played in The Straits is very similar to the character that he's playing in Succession at the moment with great success. And he's an absolute legend. You look back at his CV and his career, it's astonishing. And he is such a commanding presence, both off screen and on. And sadly, I didn't get a lot to do with him on the set of The Straits, but enough to feel exceptionally grateful to have the opportunity to share a screen with him. And yeah, I can't think of anyone who could play the character of Mr. Roy in Succession better than him, because he is just incredibly commanding to the point of being intimidating, and just oozes excellence from every pore that he has. And yeah, he's a legend, and I feel incredibly grateful that I got to work with him. Yeah, that was definitely that was a career highlight for sure.
Oh, for sure. And I love that show. In 2018, you co-starred in a TV miniseries about the life of Olivia Newton-John. You played Pat Carroll, who was Olivia's early singing partner. What kind of preparation did you have to do, knowing that you were portraying a real person?
Well, yeah, that it's always tricky when you're portraying a real person, because you obviously there's an onus on you to honor that person, and especially if they're still alive, knowing that they might actually watch your work, and hopefully you don't want to offend anybody. But I found when I was doing research for that project that there is actually so little information about Pat Carroll. I don't know that I found any actual footage of her. There were plenty of photos from when she was younger, especially, but I think in that I realized that she was very much someone who was in Olivia Newton-John's shadow. And what struck me as interesting was that as a performer from an early age, she never seemed to be bitter or jaded that she spent most of her adult life in the shadow of her exceptionally famous friend. And so that's kind of what I had to go with, was that she was Olivia Newton-John's biggest champion and best friend. And so that's kind of where I started working that character from.
Has Pat Carroll ever told you what she thought of your portrayal?
No, I've never been in contact with her. I would love to be. She seems like a really exceptional person and a good laugh. But I've not actually been in contact with her in person.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Pat Carroll wasn't the first real person you've played. Wasn't your character Wendy Pierce in Killing Time also based on a real person?
Yes, she was a real person, and possibly grateful that I didn't ever get the opportunity to meet her in real life, because she was at least a scary individual. I don't know whether maybe she's mellowed out in her later life, but what an extraordinary life. That's kind of a really famous crime family story that has been portrayed on screen so frequently in Australia. The Walsh Street murders were infamous, and she was a part of that world. The very famous movie Animal Kingdom, which Jackie Weaver was nominated for an Oscar for, that was also based on those series of events. And yeah, Wendy Pierce was a force of nature and quite a terrifying and intimidating human being. And I'm very grateful that I got the opportunity to play her. I don't think I will ever play someone as diabolical and scary as her. She was a fascinating woman, but no, I didn't meet her either.
Well, now, of course, I have to ask you about Wentworth, which was nominated for 95 awards and won 25 awards. It's one of the highest rated TV shows, not only in Australia, but it's consistently one of the top 10 shows worldwide on Netflix. You joined the cast in season 4. How did you get the part, Kate?
I didn't actually know that the show was that highly decorated and nominated. That's interesting. So I had watched the show when I was living in Los Angeles, and I was a big fan of the show. And I happened to be in Australia filming another project, and my agent mentioned that there was an audition for Wentworth for a new character. And I was such a fan of the show. I think immediately I just had blinkers were put on, and I became really focused on getting that part. And I was so sure that I was going to be a part of that show. I wanted to be a part of the show because I knew that it was a cut above a lot of projects that were being made around the world. And I just wanted to be a part of it. And so I was incredibly lucky that A, the audition came up, B, that it was something I was suitable for, and of course that I actually got the role. So yeah, it was pretty traditional. I was asked to audition, I auditioned, and I got the role that way. But the director, Kevin Carlin, is someone who I had worked with for a very long time, and he had wanted me to audition for the original season for season 1, but I wasn't available at that time. And so I think I was lucky in so far that I had a very big fan in Kevin, the director, and I think that he was instrumental in getting me the job too.
Well, you're very humble, but I have to tell you that if he was a big fan, it's because you're really terrific.
Oh, thank you. I'll take it. Thanks.
Now, given the fact that so many characters came and went on the show, did you expect to stay on the show for 5 seasons, all the way to season 8?
Oh, no, absolutely not. In fact, when I got the job, I think I signed a 3-season contract, which is fairly standard in Australia, at least. But I mean, my experience with TV up until that point was, I don't think I'd really been a part of a show, apart from maybe Offspring, that I had been a part of for more than 1 season, because the sad reality is that you can be a part of a show, even if it's really good, oftentimes it just doesn't find enough of an audience and it falls by the wayside. So I had very low expectations that the show would continue or that my character would continue, because I'd seen the first 3 seasons of the show and I knew how happy they were to cut characters from the cast, because it makes for great television. So no, to answer your question, I didn't think that I would really last beyond season 4. So to make it right until the very last episode was incredibly exciting to me. I feel lucky as well, because you always have the sword of Damocles hanging over your head if you're on a show like Wentworth or Game of Thrones or Walking Dead, where they like to cut off the main characters. So I never thought that I would last that long, and I'm certainly grateful that I did, because to be a part of that final image on such an iconic show was special, and I think definitely something that I'll remember for the tenure of my career.
Oh, for sure. I think you'll always be identified with the role of Ali Novak. No matter what else you do, that's going to be one of the top. And,
yes.
and when you look at that character, Ali Novak, she's incredibly layered and complex. She has the capacity to give and receive tremendous warmth and love, especially in her relationship with B. But then she can also be an incredibly vicious cutthroat, full of rage and revenge. Tell us about the process of fleshing out and inhabiting her character in your performances.
Well, I think the benefit and the luxury of being able to sustain a character and grow with a character over 6 seasons, I think I did on Wentworth. You have the opportunity to grow and to take that character on a real journey, because if the character is going to last that long, then hopefully the writers take you on an epic journey, and they certainly did with Ali. And it was interesting. It was really interesting to me because I think that Ali was very much a fish out of water in that prison environment. I think that she entered that world as a kind of an everyman in a way. I don't think that she was a particularly brutal or dangerous or fearsome person. In fact, I actually think that she was a really sort of innocent, naive, and mild-tempered person when she entered that system. But I think a consistent theme with Wentworth is what does it do to your core as a person? What does it do to your ethics and your morals and your humanity if everything about you, all of your freedom, is taken away? And I think that was an overarching theme in Wentworth. And of course, it happened to Ali. It happened to all of the characters, and everything and everyone was taken away from her. So the kind of hopeful puppy dog that entered in season 4 couldn't be more different to the incapacitated, broken, empty, vengeful, hopeless shell that you kind of see at the end of season 8. But I'm very glad that the producers decided to end the show with a glimmer of hope, not only for Ali but for all of the remaining characters. So I hope that wherever Ali exists in the atmosphere, that she's found some semblance of happiness.
Did you and the other cast members feel a certain sense of responsibility to the LGBTQ community in the way that the lesbian characters and relationships were portrayed on the show?
Yes, definitely. And for me, I have to admit that when I entered the show, I knew that it had a following, but I really had no idea just how popular it was and would be with the LGBT community. And obviously I knew that my character was going to be romantically involved with B. And so it was, in a way, it was probably good that I was a bit naive to how big of a following we had in that community, because I might have sometimes understanding the gravity of what you're doing can hinder a good performance, and it might have in my case. But I know that Dan and I were just very concerned with making sure that the love story was honest and believable, especially considering that B. Smith's character was someone who had never identified as queer or bisexual or gay. I'm sure she considered herself a straight person, a straight character. And so that there was, obviously an effort to make sure that awakening for her was believable and treated with care. And I'm glad that we did treat it with care, obviously, because that relationship, I think, has been one of the most popular unions, I suppose, in the show. And the fans really seemed to bond with that story. And I hope that they feel that we told that story with authenticity and gave it justice. It was certainly an honor to play that.
I think, as a member of the LGBTQ community, speaking for myself, I think that you imbued that relationship with not only authenticity, but dignity. You know what I mean?
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, that's all I could hope for. And that's all you ever really want to achieve from the stories that you tell, is that, that you're telling a story with authenticity, and hopefully it speaks to people.
Now, Wentworth was inspired by a TV show called Prisoner, which ran from 79 to 86. And in fact, the character of Joan Ferguson, better known as the Freak, the sadistically evil prison officer, originally came from Prisoner. So I'm dying to ask you, were you a fan of that show?
I was aware of the show, but I think I was just too young. I was just at that point where I would have been too young to watch the show. I was born in 81. So I feel like I have really latent memories of walking into the living room and seeing a steam press coming down and being horrified and terrified. So I definitely remember the show, and it was an iconic show, just as Wentworth has become. But no, I never actually watched it. I think I was just too young to have that in my world. But my mum certainly watched it, and everyone I know certainly has watched it. It was an iconic show back in the day, and kind of extraordinary that a remake of that went on to become just as infamous, really.
Now, I don't know whether you know this about me, but before I retired and became a talk show host, I was a criminal court judge for 26 years.
I did. Yeah.
And you did your homework. So I've seen you interviewed numerous times, and you always get the inevitable question, what do you think accounts for the incredible popularity of Wentworth? You know, millions of people are absolutely addicted to the show. And you gave an answer that really touched me as a judge. You said that the show was the perfect breeding ground for drama. And I have to tell you as a judge that I felt that way in criminal court. And when I dealt with prisoners in the courtroom, I really felt that the life they were living in jail really was the perfect breeding ground for drama. You really intuit. There's something about your performance that made you inhabit and envelop that life of being in jail and having to adapt that I found very, very real. And I wanted you to know that my colleagues and I really approved of the portrayal that you gave and that feeling that you gave the audience that it is a breeding ground for drama, because if you don't find a way to survive, you're not going to make it.
Yeah, I think that's probably indicative of a lot of people's experience with incarceration. And I'm sure that you, more than most people, would understand that. You would have had a front row seat to witness that, because I think as much as I think some countries and communities are focused on rehabilitation, I'm sure the fact is that once you are incarcerated and painted with that broad brushstroke of being a criminal, it must be incredibly difficult to rehabilitate from that. And certainly the women that I spoke to who were in prison, so many of them said that once you're in a dozen times, and it almost becomes a cycle and a habit, to the point where some women that I spoke to said that they felt more comfortable and safe being inside than they did on the outside.
Yes, of course. And becoming institutionalized is exactly what we don't want to happen to offenders. And I think that you managed to convey the concept that when you put someone who is antisocial or who has emotional damage, and you put them in a population with a whole bunch of other people who are emotionally damaged, that doesn't spell out a recipe for rehabilitation.
Yeah, of course. And I think that sometimes the people who find themselves maybe in situations where they're dependent on drugs or, have nowhere safe to turn to, often they are, by nature more impressionable or more dependent, and then entering a system which, as you say, can so easily institutionalize you. It then must be so much harder to break that cycle inside and on the outside. So I really feel for people, because I think it's true that not everyone who winds up in jail is a bad person, and to then break free from that stigma and try and live a lawful and happy life once you're released, it must be a huge challenge. And I'm sure in your tenure as a judge, you would have seen so many people coming back and being shipped back off to jail.
Oh, I sure did. Now, another question you've been given a million times. You've often been asked to compare Wentworth to the American TV series Orange is the New Black. I just want to tell you that I think Wentworth is much grittier, and it has more shocking plot twists and has a kind of ruthless intensity that I did not see in Orange is the New Black. Do you agree?
Yeah, well, I have to admit, I've only seen the first 2 seasons of Orange is the New Black, and I loved it. I really loved those first 2 seasons, and I should go back and watch the rest of it. But I think I can completely understand the comparisons that are drawn. They're 2 shows, female-led, about women who are institutionalized. and what that and what that lack of freedom does to your humanity. So I can see the similarities there, of course, but I think tonally they are such different shows that it's almost unfair to compare them, because Orange is the New Black was, bordered on comedy a lot of the time, and I really enjoyed that. It felt in some ways satirical, and there were definitely camp elements, and I really, really enjoyed that. And I think Wentworth was just in its tone it just wanted to go a different way. It wanted to be really gritty and really dark, and not at all focusing on comedy or levity. Obviously there were moments, but I think ultimately they were very, very different shows, and which is great, because I think that you can enjoy both of those shows and not have and not need them to be the same thing.
I just thought Wentworth was so unpredictable. It kept you on the edge of your seat. It was like a roller coaster. And given the intensity of the drama on the show and the unpredictability of the plots, what was the atmosphere like on the set?
Yeah, look, I think we all understood implicitly that we were expendable, especially after the end of season 4 when B. Smith was killed. I think that when that happened, it became a show where all bets were off and no one was safe. If a character as integral as B. Smith can be killed off the show, then we are all on borrowed time. And I like that. I really liked I liked that about the show, that it never played it safe. It thrilled audiences by doing the unexpected, and it thrilled us as actors as well. I mean, so frequently we would be at a table read and you'd hear the audible gasps, not expecting what was going to happen next. And even though it's really sad when beloved characters meet their end, it's kind of an honor in a way. I have to admit that I sort of secretly, not so secretly, wanted Ali to die, because it's sort of an honor in a way to have a Wentworth death, and I never got that. I got close a couple of times, but yeah, it's I think that's part of what made the show so thrilling, is that it was unafraid to kill off beloved and pivotal characters.
Well, in season 8, one of my all-time favorite actresses, Marta Dusseldorp, joined the cast as Sheila Bosch. I was obsessed with her in A Place to Call Home, so I can't resist asking you, what was she like to work with? She
is, I think, the perfect casting for Sheila. Beguiling and diabolical, not her as a person, but she just sort of has all of this present, just bubbling right at the surface of who she is. Like, just such an interesting woman, and so interesting to watch, and the way that she crafts her characters, I think, is really interesting. And I loved the character of Sheila, and I thought that she played that character so well, really subtly. And and again, sadly, I didn't get that much to do with her. Our characters really never crossed paths, but I thought that she brought a real subtle scariness to that character, which I think was needed. And I mean, speaking of epic deaths on Wentworth, I think that hers was gothic, maybe one of the most gruesome deaths that there was on Wentworth.
Now, Wentworth wasn't the first show you did that had a primarily female ensemble cast. There was Satisfaction, which focused on the lives of 5 young women in a high-class brothel, correct?
Correct. That is correct, yeah.
But it's still a fairly rare occurrence on television and in the movies to have a female ensemble cast, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is. And again, it's something that I have to remind myself was in many ways unique and groundbreaking about Wentworth. I think I've been so lucky to be a part of so many ensembles which have felt familial and supportive and, rich with female actors and great female characters. And so I kind of had to remind myself that Wentworth existed in its own world, really, where the whole show was about women. And of course, we had extraordinary men, not only acting in the show, but producing and writing. We had that, but it's nice to be a part of a show where the men provided the diversity and not the women. I think that Wentworth always did a really good job of promoting women on screen and off, and that's something that I was incredibly proud to be a part of.
Now, following Wentworth, you starred in a wonderful TV series called Amazing Grace, in which you played a devoted midwife who gets the shock of her life when the daughter she gave up for adoption 17 years earlier arrives at the birth center pregnant. I was shocked, Kate, that the show ended after only one season. Do you think the network was a little hasty in canceling it before giving it a chance to develop a broader audience?
It's such a tricky thing to answer, and I feel like my answer is yes, but also sadly no. I think it's just such a hard ask these days, sadly, for a show to find enough of an audience that it can then sustain the cost of making a second season, because of course with the second season everybody's fee goes up but the funding stays the same. So it becomes a situation of diminishing returns for the producers. So it really has to be a success for it to continue. And I think, unfortunately for the team at Amazing Grace, we found ourselves on the precipice of, I suppose it's sad to even say, but the death of drama on commercial TV. Our show was on Channel 9, which is free to air television in Australia. And sadly, I think that it's just not how people consume TV anymore. It's so rare that people will sit down on 7:30 on a Wednesday night and watch their TV show, because, as you know, binge television, streaming television is how people consume their content these days. And I totally understand it. It's how I consume my TV as well. And so I think it makes it even all the more extraordinary that you can have a show like, say, Wentworth or Game of Thrones that defies that, and people will tune in every day on the day because they don't want to miss it. They don't want to be the one left out the next day. But yeah, to answer your question, I was certainly sad that we didn't get to explore that story further, because I thought that there was just so far that world could have gone. And I just loved Grace. Of all the characters that I've played, she was definitely one of my favorite, and I wanted to see what happened to her and her family. But I think what I've learned, a skill that I have developed over the years as an actor, is that you really have to appreciate the job you have for the time that you're doing it, because sadly the chances are you may not get to revisit that world again.
Well, I think it's heartbreaking. I think that the multiplicity of channels and platforms out there is a great thing. Many people say we are living now in a new golden age of television, but they just don't give these shows long enough of a chance. Because the thing about Grace that I loved, there was the technical medical side of the job of being a midwife, and then there was the emotional aspect of giving support to the patients. And you, Kate Jenkinson, blew me away at the way that you fused that in character. You infused that character with both sides of that job.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I mean, I grew to love midwives in the process of making that show. I think they're just extraordinary people. And I think, a lot of people that work in the medical arena, midwives especially, I think, because they are ushering people through the most exhilarating, memorable, and sometimes traumatic, actually often traumatic days of their lives. And yeah, I think they're extraordinary humans, and they have to remain so incredibly calm, be on point with all of the medical procedure that they have to go through. But again, it's such an it takes such an emotional toll on you as well. I think that perhaps in other medical professions, a doctor, even a nurse, that there is a clinical aspect to that role that you don't necessarily have to have empathy to be a good doctor, because as long as you're prescribing the right thing, as long as you're giving the right advice and diagnosing correctly, you've done a good job. Whereas I think midwives really do have to be empathetic, and they do have to know how to support people and people who are going through an intense trauma, both physically and mentally sometimes. And I just think that midwives are absolutely extraordinary. And I feel very honored that I got to play one, even briefly.
Well, another really amazing thing about Amazing Grace is that the birthing center had a holistic, warm, less clinical atmosphere than most hospitals, and the staff made it a relaxed and a happy place to give birth. I think the birthing center in that show is a perfect prototype for what should be happening everywhere, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember actually filming that, and all of the women and men that came through and were performing birthing scenes. I think every single one of us said, my gosh, this is where I would want to give birth. And ironically, 8 months later, I went on to give birth in a very traditional, quite sterile hospital situation. And I do remember thinking mid-push, God, I wish I was at St. Bridget's Birthing Centre currently. But yeah, it really did create the most ideal birthing center, the sort of the dream place that you would want to welcome your new child into the world. But, it was a television show, and I suppose there are realities that would perhaps prevent that from becoming a reality. But I do know that there are certainly far more holistic and less clinical options for people who are having babies if they want to move away from the very sort of sterile and clinical hospital setting.
So of all the characters you've played, which one do you think most closely resembles the real Kate Jenkinson?
Yeah, I think it would be Grace, to be honest. Yeah, someone who is passionate about their work, someone who tries always to do the right thing and say the right thing, often fails, someone who loves their family. And I think someone who's just looking to complete a sort of a traditional picture of happiness, which includes a fulfilled work life, a happy home life. And I think the thing that interested me most about Grace, and that I can relate to now that I am a mother, is that she was so adept at bringing babies into the world, and yet she was incapable of succeeding as a mother in her real life. Obviously she had given birth as a 17-year-old and then lost a baby when she was in her 30s, and so had never really managed to successfully parent a child, and yet she was an expert at bringing babies into the world. So I found that juxtaposition incredibly interesting about her. So yeah, I would say that Grace is the closest to me.
So what's next for Kate Jenkinson? Are you able to tell us any projects you're working on right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's so common for actors to say that we don't really know, and that is certainly the truth. I don't exactly know what the future is going to be holding for me. I believe that I'm shooting something at the end of the year, which I certainly hope comes to fruition, because it's a show I've been a part of for a few seasons now. And so I'm hoping that I'll be shooting that at the end of the year. And there are a couple of projects that might be coming up a bit sooner, but it's the story of an actor's life. You're constantly in a holding pattern, and you always are hopeful, but are always prepared to hear no when no's inevitably come. But yeah, I'm hoping to reprise a role at the end of this year, and there are a few things that are coming up a bit sooner that I hope will come to fruition.
So you mentioned an actor's life. You spent 3 years at drama school at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. Kate, are you having the career that you envisaged for yourself all those years ago at school?
No, I'm having a far better career than I envisioned for myself. Yeah, I think I decided that I wanted to be an actor with really no understanding of what a career in this industry would look like. I guess I understood that there was the concept of, movie stars and people can make a living from this, but I never really assumed or thought that I could or would make a living from it. I loved it. And I guess I hoped that I would finish my time at drama school and go into the industry and maybe get work. But I think I had such low expectations, and not that I had no confidence in my ability. I guess I just thought that people who were celebrities or stars or movie stars or even people on TV, it just felt like a very big disconnect from what I was doing at drama school. And actually, I remember the first time that I ever met Rebel Wilson was when I had just graduated drama school. And I think the only thing on her CV at that point was fat pizza, and she was on a television commercial for Australian Idol at that point. But she was on TV. And so for me, she was a celebrity. She was a star. She was someone who was on TV. And I was so starstruck by her when I first met her. And then I suppose things happen incrementally. I then found myself on a TV show with her the very next year. You get one job, then you get another. And slowly over the space of 20 years, you realize that you've had a career. And it's certainly more than I ever dreamt of. I'm very proud of it. And I think it's something now that I can look back on and think that even if I never work again as an actor, I can be very proud of what I've achieved. But
well, wait a minute. I just have to ask you, do you get, really deep down, do you really get how very, very talented and gifted you are?
Oh, thank you so much, Harvey. That's lovely to say. I have confidence in my ability for sure. And I am proud of how much I've grown as an actor, because I don't think that any actor is born with exceptional talent. I think that you really do have to curate that and foster that over a period of time. And I certainly think that I have, through a lot of hard work and a lot of practice, gotten a lot better. And I'm proud of that growth and that evolution. But I also know, I guess, having been in the industry for so long, that being employed, you don't necessarily get a job because you're the best person for the job. There is an art to casting, and sometimes no matter how good you are or how average you are, sometimes it can bear no relation to whether you get the role or not. And so I'm always incredibly grateful and on some level surprised when I'm cast in something, because, the odds are very, very much against you always. And with that in mind, I guess I can look back and be very proud of what I've achieved, because, yeah, it can be a very hard industry to be in and to sustain a career in. So I feel overwhelmingly grateful for what I have been able to achieve in a tough industry.
Well, one of the things I've learned in my role as an interviewer is that it's not just about talent, as you mentioned. In this industry, it's also about being on time, knowing your lines, being a team player, being a professional. And your reputation is all of that. You've got the gift, you deliver the performance, and you're a pleasure to work with. And I think you should remember that one of the reasons you get cast so often is because people like you. They like working with you. That's important.
Yeah, it absolutely is important. It's a business at the end of the day, and unless you are the head of a studio, you've almost always got a boss that you report to. And if you are someone who's difficult to work with, or have gotten an unpleasant name for yourself due to bad behavior, or, as you say, tardiness or a lack of respect, the very real reality is that there are so many talented actors out there, and why would anyone want to employ someone who is going to be difficult? And I think for me, at the end of the day, is I love what I do so much, and I'm always so thrilled to be working that I just wouldn't dream of turning up late to work, because I want to be there. I want to be there to not miss a moment.
Well, Kate, I must tell you, it's been such a pleasure having this opportunity to interview you. I've been a fan of your work for so many years. Thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for your incredible show and what you do. I think that you bring a lot of joy to people. So it's really lovely to be a part of that. It's very rare that I do an interview and I get asked questions that I haven't been asked before. And you basically, all of the questions you asked me were unique, and I really had to think about my answers. So thank you for asking me questions that I haven't been asked before.
Thank you so much, Kate. Our guest has been one of Australia's most popular actresses, Kate Jenkinson. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.